those of you who listen to the show, you know, Greg and I, we don't waste a lot of time with all the niceties. We like to jump into it and try to find those solutions. So we have some we have some index cards that we put out there for you to go ahead and write your questions down. We'll get them. And already we got a stack of questions from the audience, and we're gonna jump into it if y'all don't mind. Y'all don't mind? No. All right. The first question that got from the audience is, and this question is specifically for corrections, but everybody else can jump in if you got something to contribute. What are the future plans for reentry or reintegration initiatives for a lot of those folk that we see that are going in and out of jail? And then that's the first question.
Okay. So right now what we're doing is we are looking at our reentry initiatives overall. What we've asked is the National Institute of Corrections, which is NIC, that they come to Orange County to help us look at what we're doing. What we want to make sure is that we're providing best practices for these reentry initiatives, and they're scheduled to come down, and at that time we will look at everything that's going on, what we need to do, and look at enhancing them. Reentry is something that's very big in corrections today, and one of the reasons why it's so big is that 96% of our inmate population is going right back out on the street. Yep. So if we don't do something to enhance and strengthen our reentry initiative, they're just going to come right back.
Yep. Wow. Brother Love, before we move on to the next part of the question, just want to remind everyone that you have blue cards. And as we proceed with today's program, if you have any questions, write your questions on these cards. Ms. Kim, who's sitting right here holding up the cards, will get the question from you. We'll make sure that we'll have your question read. So if you have any questions, make sure that you have them written down and we'll get them asked for you. Brother Love, going with that next part.
Okay, and here's the piece, and I'm glad that we started off and having a conversation with corrections. But for those of you, matter of fact, here's a gift prize for anybody if you can figure out or tell us what are the 4 C's that we're going to be discussing here today. Coach, you disqualified. Well, since nobody has raised their hand, the 4 C's that we're talking about are cops, courts, correction, and one of the C's that you don't hear about often but is equally important is community. And so we're going to keep this thing rolling. And Chief, the next question that I have is, what challenges does corrections face in addressing inmates with mental health concerns?
Oh, well, I will tell you the first thing is we're in jail. Individuals that are suffering from mental illness, not all should be incarcerated. We need to look at other avenues that we can go ahead and utilize so that these individuals can get treatment and services. So what we've done is, first of all, I'm on the board of directors for NAMI, which is an organization that helps break the stigma. And what we're doing here in Orange County right now is we are putting a mental health diversion program together where we can go ahead and look at this issue. This issue is not an issue that's just in the jails. It's a community issue. So we have to remember that it takes more than just the jail staff to get this done. So in this diversion program, what's happening is we want to look at it from 3 parts. We want to look at it from what we call a pre-booking, then in-jail services, and then post-release. And all 3 of them have to be working the best that it possibly can to produce positive results. So when we look at the pre-booking, what we're looking is what's called CIT, Crisis Interventions Team. It's a training where we educate law enforcement, corrections, all those that are in public safety, how to deal with an individual that's in crisis. And then to see whether or not the crime that they committed is something that needs to be brought to jail, or is there another place that they can go ahead and get the services that they need. So we're looking at it from the pre-booking. Then we look at it from inside the jail. Inside the jail, we're looking at what programs are we utilizing to help stabilize these individuals, and then how do we work with the community partners on the outside for post-release. So that way, those individuals that are in jail, that have to be in jail, that we just don't release them back to the community, and then there's no medication. Because 30 days, the individual is in jail for 30 days and they're on Medicaid, they lose that benefit.
Wow.
And then what happens is they go back out to society. And if they go back out to society and they don't have the medication that they need to stabilize themselves, what do you think is going to happen?
Wow.
They're going to end up right back in jail.
Yeah.
So that's why the community is a big part of it, to get ahead and pass them on and get them on.
So that's where the interaction comes back in with Chief Roland and all kinds of
Absolutely.
sheriff's
It's
department.
everybody.
Yeah, now Chief Roland, I saw you to kind of perk up on this question here.
Yeah, because that is one of the biggest challenges that we're facing in law enforcement today. You know, say the state of Florida, it used to be that the state would provide certain services and there were institutions that would actually address the needs of those individuals who were going through mental crisis and needed long-term care. Unfortunately, that has gone away. The funding for that has gone away. And now that has been placed in the hands of law enforcement and corrections to try to manage that. There are so many people that often end up, unfortunately, in jail who really technically should be in some institution receiving long-term care. And when they're put through the process of a jail facility after they get arrested, and soon after they're back out on the streets, unfortunately, you're just setting them up again for that cycle to continue. And it is something that we desperately, I think, holistically as a nation, we need to address. There's a lot more attention that should be given to those suffering from mental illness that unfortunately law enforcement and corrections and the judicial system has been put in place to somewhat handle.
You know, and that's interesting because, Brother Love, you'll remember there was a program that we did over in Apopka, and Ryan Williams came out and he was talking about relationships with the state attorneys or things of that nature. But Judge Allen, this kind of brings me to your aspect of it because you see the individuals that Chief Q and Chief Roland are talking about after this whole process of being arrested and things of that nature, and they're standing there facing a sentencing or things of that nature. Hearing this, how does that affect your role in the judicial process?
Well, it's very difficult sometimes to identify people who have mental health issues. From the perspective of the judge, we do need the attorneys to be the voice for the people who are experiencing mental health effects. And usually that comes from the defense attorney. It could be the public defender, it may be defense counsel, and sometimes it can come from the state side. Whoever identifies these mental health concerns first needs to bring it to the court's attention. And there's also another segment of the populace who can bring mental health issues to our attention, and that's family members and community members,
Right.
Pastors, anyone who can identify something that has been going on with this individual, because the court cannot act unless we are aware of something that's going on. Obviously, if we see someone who's in mental health distress in court, then we can act. But once it's brought to our attention, then there are safeguards in place. There are experts that are able to evaluate these individuals and determine what the exact analysis is or diagnosis is for these individuals. And if they should be in the criminal justice system, or if there's something going on that was surrounding the offense that they were accused of, that somehow puts them in a different analysis. So we do our best, and we do have challenges, and the challenges are community-wide. But I think that we do a lot of good with regard to the way that we work with the attorneys, the state attorneys and the defense attorneys, to bring to our attention.
And that's the interesting part, Brother Love, if you remember, because remember, when someone is arrested, it's the state attorney that brings forth the charges, am I saying this right?
Yes, sir.
Against that individual. And so if the state attorney has information from the family or from the community, and Pastor Bradford, I believe you were there also to hear this part of it, but if the state attorney knows that there's issues with that individual, they can go after a lesser charge, or actually in some cases try to help that person to get the help that they need before they have a charge on their record. So what we're hearing is actually very important from the standpoint that when the police officers, they arrest an individual, if they identify something that's taking place, if the prosecuting attorney sees something and they can try to get that person some help, the judge can actually help to get these individuals the help that they need, so that when Chief Q sees them, he's hopefully not seeing individuals who need help, mental assistance, versus actual crime or criminal behavior that needs to be addressed.
One of the words that has continued to come up is the word community.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think we've all experienced, and I tell you more times than not, is the problem. When we have those resources and we see that those resources have been successful, for whatever reason, once we see that success, those resources disappear.
Right.
As if the problem is solved and it's gone. But then we see the problem reoccur because the resources are gone. So we know what the problem is. The solution is making sure that those resources are existing, because when you look at the back end of it, we're paying more to try to rev what we started up again. So that's one of the notes. But Pastor Beach, you know, we talked about community and you know, where you're at in the community. And you told me this story maybe a year ago about this young man who was released from prison or jail. Talk to us.
Well, unfortunately, most of the time when we get them in the community, it's like Chief Q said, over 90% will be released back into the community, and the recidivism rate is super high. But in our case, if we discern some mental health issues, we refer them for mental health counseling. But I think even more than the mental health, there's a lot of individuals who are not necessarily suffering from mental health issues, but there is a stigma, like you said, attached to a person that's been released, especially if they have a felony, and it's very difficult for them when they try to re-enter society. And one of the things that we try to do as a community, as a church, is hold people accountable. And so everybody gets, I call it jailhouse salvation. Everybody gets that, you know, because you're reading, you're in a confined place, and there's not many things coming at you. And so when they come home, everybody's on fire for their community. They're on fire for God. They're on fire for education and all of that. And when I get them, because I really love brothers and sisters that when they come home, I try to grab them and bring them in. But and they always say the same thing. I'm never going back. I'm never turning. I'm going to be with you. And I understand that, and I tell them the same thing. I said, shake my hand for the next 52 weeks in a row, and I believe you. Because at the end of the day, life hits them when they come home.
Right.
Now, it is frustrating to not be able to find a job that can gainful employment to take care of your family. It's very difficult that you can't stay in certain apartments, or even, especially some of the brothers that come home, they cannot even stay with their wives, especially if they're receiving some kind of public assistance in the apartments that they live in. So it's very difficult. And so I think part of this community, the community portion, is holding these brothers and sisters accountable, but also being able to refer them to some places for some resources for education, some resources for employment, and also resources for food in many cases.
Before I move to Dr. Nelson, let me leave you all with this, because this situation has come up more than once, and it's come up enough to where I think it's worth mentioning it here, because we're having this conversation now. There are a number of individuals, when they return home from being incarcerated, because of the stresses that they have without being able to provide for their families and different things of that nature, they actually apply for Social Security disability. Because they feel that because of that incarceration, they are now disabled. I want you all to think on that just for a little bit as I go to Dr. Nelson, because I may have a question of the audience on that as well. Dr. Nelson, hearing all that we're hearing today, as it comes from a community pastor, as it comes from corrections, as it comes from the judiciary, as it comes from law enforcement directly with Chief Roland, what's the importance of building relationships to ensure that we're getting individuals the assistance that they need in understanding these processes?
I think Chief Roland stated it well. I think it's about resources. The fact that you don't have mental health services. And the issue becomes, I think it's great for us to have these conversations, and I love conversations that are intimate. It's not a town hall. But politics is a huge part of this conversation. Yes. Because none of us in this room can say we're going to put $10 million towards mental health. None of us, individually. But collectively, we can mandate, we can tell the folk that we elect that this is an issue for us. And there's no reason why there shouldn't be mental health services, because you're going to pay one way or the other. So if the pay is continue to arrest them and send them to jail, Orange County, the jail, if you look at individual sectors, the jail system consumes more money from Orange County than any other branch. The jails, the amount of money. So you invest in what you care about. So if we can divert some of those individuals with mental health issues from the jail, we'll save money for the county. And as taxpayers, if you own a home, you own it, you're paying taxes. So we need to demand that of our politicians. So that's one of the things I would say from a political standpoint. I think it's great for us to have this conversation, but I think this builds on the other conversations that we have to have as well.
Dr. Nelson, on that note, one of the huge pieces that I've been able to participate in with Bethune-Cookman University and what you do as it relates to law enforcement, community engagement. Greg and I, we got numerous responses from California and South Carolina regarding the issue of 2 6-year-olds or a 6 and an 8-year-old being arrested, and everybody was saying, okay, what you guys gonna do next week? How you gonna talk about this? Well, here's the switch on this. Our conversation is not necessarily gonna talk about the 6-year-olds who were arrested, and I'm gonna give Chief a moment to talk about that. What our conversation is about is something that we're seeing evolve, and that's leadership in positions that the Chief is in, because he took the conversation away from us.
Yeah.
But by looking at the leadership, that one, I think, and Chief, I'm gonna let you go ahead and direct this, but because you have a policy in place that doesn't allow for anybody under 12 years old to be arrested, that something took place, and I'm gonna defer to you to go there, but I wanna recognize the fact that you didn't wait till there was outrage from the community to act.
I appreciate that. And so the issue was that we have a policy, and it's a policy that's been in place for a very long time, that requires for one of our officers, if they're going to put a child under the age of 12 under custody, that they must get the approval of a manager, a watch commander. And unfortunately, it was 2 6-year-olds. During the first process, that policy was the policy was not followed, right? And the child was literally taken to the juvenile assessment center. During the second process, someone caught on what was happening, put an immediate stop. A watch commander was called, and the watch commander handled it. Rightly so, said, no, stop. We need to put the child back at the school, leave this, let's work on this. The bottom line is that sometimes you can have the best policy in the world. For example, our vehicle pursuit policy, we modeled our policy because we asked the community to come in and basically meet with us and draft the best policy we thought we could ever have for vehicle pursuits, but yet every once in a while someone deviates from the policy, right? So this policy, to be honest with you, when it comes to the children, solid. But every time something like this happens, it gives us an opportunity to review the way we do business, to review how we have policies and regulations in place, and modify them a little bit. In this case, I believe, it is my opinion, that unfortunately the officer had the mindset that it was okay. I don't think he did it maliciously or intentionally. He just thought it was okay for him to arrest his child, and unfortunately, the incident occurred. So I had the luxury in this case, though, to be able to take quick action because he was what we call a reserve officer. The reserve officers serve at the will of the chief. Mind you now, if it had been a regular officer who was not a reserve officer, then we have contractual issues. We have the officer Bill of Rights. We have many things that, internal investigation, a process that would then have to determine discipline. The outcome would have been the same, but the length and the process would have been much different. So I say that to say that, that at times when situations come up, although on the surface it may seem like the thing to do and right away, we are also governed by certain things that may restrict us in that process. Now we need to do a better job of explaining how that process works so that everyone understands that. Again, in this case, I had the luxury of taking quick action. Hopefully it will never happen again, but if it had been different, a regular officer, the process would have been longer.
So that the difference in process, a reserve officer versus
A regular sworn
Thank
member.
you, Chief.
Yeah.
Yeah, before we switch to the next topic, let me tell you how quick Chief Roland moved on this topic. I'm riding to the studio, to the radio studio, the day that I'm listening, and I heard early in the day that it was 2 6-year-olds. Then I hear Chief Roland on the radio saying the officer has been suspended. I'm driving to the studio, and Rod, I go in and say, Rod, they just fired because I heard on the radio they had just fired him. I was like, I just heard they just suspended him. Now they fired. And then I'm like, this process was going so quickly, and I was like, man, we don't have anything to talk about. I wanted to talk bad about Chief Roland. That's how we made radio, but he didn't even give us no material that night.
But material that we can use, and this is something that I hope it becomes contagious, is the conversation about leadership.
Right.
You know, and we understand the difference in reserve versus a career service officer, but that makes a difference.
But and he also said that the outcome would not have changed either.
Correct.
Well, I think it's two things. It's twofold. One thing for me, just as a parent, I just can't think of. It's kind of like, would you do that for your child? So that's one. The second for me is that, and kind of like Chief said, he was able to do this because of the status of this individual. But it would have been another officer. The officer still been paid, still doing that, and then eventually that would happen. That's why it's so critical for us to identify good folk to go in this profession up front. If we identify up front in terms of the gatekeeper, because law enforcement is no different than anyone. You have bad judges, bad professors, you have that. But the difference is someone that has the power to take life and liberty under the guise of the law, we have to hold them to a higher standard.
Yeah.
And what I appreciate about Chief Roland is he understands that too. He understands that there are people in blue that shouldn't be in there. The trick is, there are students at Bethune-Cookman University that are criminal justice major that I'll tell him now, don't hire that one. I would tell, we have to do that for everything. We have to be better at because a lot of the folk, whether you look at Ferguson, whether you look anywhere, and I use Ferguson just as an example of the outcry, not necessarily about this, but most of the things that you'll see is they were bad before they did that. Whatever that was, they were bad before they. I contend that if you look at an officer's record prior to doing that, a lot of times you'll say, well, why the hell is he in the first place? So we collectively, as a community, collectively as a profession, we need to do a better job of that. Now, within our community, the same way that we say we want our kids to go on to be doctors, lawyers, and that, the same thing about the matter of fact, the doctor and the lawyers, we don't see all of that about some unarmed black or unarmed brown. We don't see the same way that we push our kids to be doctors and lawyers. We need to do the same thing about those that are going to protect our community. Right. We have to be there.
And if I may add, Dr. Nelson, so think about this. For the Orlando Police Department alone, on average, any given year, 5,000 applicants. Out of that, half of them, 2,500, are afforded an opportunity to continue on. Out of those 2,500, 100 or so are selected. That's how selective. We're picking the cream of the crop, right? Our profession, law enforcement, we represent less than 0.5% of our nation's population. 0.5% that is entrusted, obviously, to provide all the things that we would expect from the profession, the protection, and to act right, and always act right, professionally always. But we come from the human race. And unfortunately, as humans, at times, they might make mistakes. Misconduct and mistakes are two totally different things. You can't mix the two, right? But when it comes to situations like this, we were talking about the medical profession, and I don't know the exact figure, but some have said that over 200,000 people die each year in the United States out of malpractice, medical malpractice. If that is true, think about that, about 200,000 people. We don't look at the medical profession as, a doctor, that person is going to kill somebody or has killed someone. We think of them as, gosh, we're glad that they're there for us just in case I someday may need them. They're there for us. The law enforcement profession, it's the work that they're doing as far as positive work is by far positive over everything you and I would expect from a law enforcement officer. But unfortunately, our war today is against social media, and it's a constant battle that when we do something good, Unfortunately, it could be 100,000 things that we did right, but if one of those incidents comes up, it tarnishes the reputation, not just for the agency, but the profession as a whole. And that's our challenge. That's our challenge.
Hey, let me say this because we have 50 minutes left, and this is where Greg and I, we move in rapid fire. Chief, we did get a message that you might have to.
I'm gonna stick around.
Okay.
I have my nephew waiting for dinner, but I'm gonna stick around.
So this is the rapid fire. We got some good questions, and so what I'm gonna ask of our guests is, just like the show that we do. And when we start, we look up, and it's almost time for it to be over. So we're gonna ask you if you could be as succinct as possible. Here's one of the questions. What can you do to help people without a college degree get a good or better job? And so I'm gonna start lobbing these at some folk, and the rest of the audience can jump into it. Greg.
Okay, you said those without college degree.
Correct.
Trades, that trades pay. Air conditioning. You don't have to. You AC. Everybody in Florida needs AC. Come on, plumbers. There's a whole lot of different things that you can do. Find a problem and solve it. He who solves the problem get paid. So you mean to tell me it's been 3 years and you haven't found one problem you can solve? Pick up some paper for somebody. Come to this barbershop and say, can I sweep up?
I want to add to that. Be willing to volunteer.
That's right.
If you're willing to volunteer, there is a chance that you may be hired on if they see how willing you are to come and give of your time freely. Show up, and you actually might wind up with the job.
Yeah. And that's true because far too many times people say, I'm not going out there, I'm not working for nobody for free. But Judge Allen is absolutely right. I've seen situations, my daughter, if I can just put her on Front Street. Yeah, my daughter, she was a volunteer at a civil engineering firm at age 14. They hired her this past summer because she came in, she wanted to volunteer. That's any profession. That if you just give your time freely and they see that you're serious about it, people want to give you an opportunity, believe it or not. Because remember, with Amendment 4, remember it wasn't fellas who voted to pass Amendment 4. It was individuals who see how the struggle is for individuals who come home and unable to find work, place to live and things like that. So people do care about individuals who have been convicted of a felony, and that's how it was passed. Because when I say felon, because felons weren't able to vote, who didn't have their rights restored, and that passed by how many percentage, Brother Love? 63%?
Yeah, 63%.
Overwhelmingly. So we care about making sure that individuals who return home have the same abilities to provide for themselves and for their families as anyone else. Here's a question here. How do we get jobs and housing to individuals convicted of a felony?
Any of our panelists? Greg, you're an expert on that, so you might have to contribute to that one as well.
Well, one of the things that I always say is we have to build sustainable communities and we have to do it from within. If we have business leaders in our community who are providing jobs, that's how you provide jobs to those individuals. One of the cases that I think about just kind of immediately, and y'all going to think I'm crazy because I'm almost 50 years old, but I listen to hip hop. Don't judge me. Is Nipsey Hussle. Nipsey Hussle, and with the Marathon District in California, he went in, he built a whole community where individuals who had been convicted of a felony could come and get jobs and could work and could provide for their families. You have organizations such as Goodwill who provide second chance to individuals so that they can work and make money and provide for their families. You have individuals like Pastor Bradford who had his own business in the community that could hire individuals. So I think that sustainability in communities by providing job opportunities with business leaders is one of the ways we can do those things.
Well, that goes to a point of mission creep. And sometimes it's difficult for folks to stand up here and you ask one of those questions that's not within their mission to say, to be quiet. That's not within the mission. And one of the things that we saw some years ago, and it was sad to actually hear this with Chief Brown, he was the chief of police for the Dallas community, and he said law enforcement is being expected to be all things to all people. And one of the things, and that's why we have community represented on this panel. I was talking to Pastor Beecham earlier. One of the most underutilized resources in these communities that are referring the majority of the arrest and delinquency and dependency are the people that are attending these community-based organizations or faith-based organizations that have skill sets in therapy, in HVAC, and a number of other services. So that's why we have Pastor Beecham and Pastor Bradford. It's good to see you here as well. But the engagement from a community perspective. Pastor, can you speak to that?
Well, from the community aspect, I think as it relates to our people coming home, to those who are having trouble finding jobs, finding housing, we have to identify those in our community who have businesses. We have to identify. I love what your honorable judge said. She said sometimes you have to be willing to volunteer. Sometimes you have to be willing to show someone that I have something to contribute. But the problem is you want it now. Mm-hmm. Well, you didn't get yourself into trouble just one time. You had a series of trouble. You're not going to be out in one day. You didn't get in one day. Right. And so at the end of the day, we may have to humble ourselves and work for pennies, if you will, and sometimes for nothing. Looking at it as a seed that will grow something in the future. I'm one of those people. I'm a firm believer that your good will. God says this. He's not unfaithful to forget your labor of love. That's the scripture. I'm a pastor. So and so if you faithfully grind at it and work at it, there's always somebody watching that is capable of helping you and blessing you in the assignment that you have in life. If it's nothing but start your own business, start cutting grass, start doing something. There's not a week that goes by that somebody doesn't come by my office and say, "Hey, Pastor, you got anything we can do? Can I just pick up some paper around here?" I said, "Okay, hey, I got a shed that need cleaning out. You can earn these $50 real quick." And it's always something that they really truly appreciate. Now sometimes they just want you to give it to them, and then obviously you didn't want it. Because no, I have something you can do. If you came here for the handout, that's not it. But we will give you a hand up.
Can I throw out there 2 things? One, a little boy would come by my house every day and ask me if he could work in my yard. And I would say, "No, you cannot work in my yard because you're too little and I don't want the liability." And one day there was a snake in my yard. And the snake, it shed its skin, and I went looking for the little boy to come rape my yard. But that little boy was persistent. I asked my daughter, I said, "Where does that little boy live?" Because I'm scared to go in my backyard. But I want to circle back to that question about convicted felons and housing. One of my job obligations is that I handle landlord-tenant cases, and part of that is I get a lot of unlawful detainer charges that are claims that are made. And an unlawful detainer can be a family member trying to remove another family member from their home because generally they just don't get along with each other anymore. And sometimes the person who is being removed or they're seeking to remove is a convicted felon who has no other options. And it will break my heart to have to remove them, but the law requires that if the owner wants you out of that house and you're not paying rent, I'm going to have to remove you. And I often wonder if this family could benefit from some kind of family therapy. And I can't offer it. I cannot offer them family therapy. I'm a civil judge. But I wish there was something in the community, churches somewhere, where people would try to make it an important factor for people who come out of jail to learn how to get along with their family members. Sometimes that's all you have. Right. If all I have is my mom and she has a 3-bedroom house and I can live with her, but I can't get along with her or follow her rules, then I kind of probably should be out struggling, trying to figure out what I'm going to do, where I'm going to live. You got to be able to accept that you need someone on some level. And I just think we need to see a little more of that.
Well, I mentioned the rapid fire, and I see y'all starting to put names on these cards now, too. So, rapid fire. And this has Dr. Nelson, Chief, and Judge address the issue of implicit bias.
Wow.
Doctor?
we all have it. I mean, that's the first thing, is recognize that we all have it.
Yes.
I was doing a training at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office.
And we're next.
If I, born and raised in this country, so born and raised in rural North Florida, if I were to pull over a white male with a swastika, with a Confederate flag in the back, I would be lying to you if I told you I didn't have a preconceived idea of who this person. But the way I would treat that individual is the same as I would treat a black male. Only thing would change me if he did something. That's the only thing would change the way that I treat this individual. So I think one thing is just recognize that we all have it. Me growing up in rural North Florida on dirt roads and trains, that's who I am. That's a reflection of the way I see the world. So same way with the white male. So now I take this back. If I'm a black male and I pull over a black male with the shiny rims, gold grill, dreads, I would be lying to you if I told you I didn't have a way of viewing this individual. I would be lying. Now, I could pull over a black male, khakis, sharp, and that's the murderer. That very way. But I wouldn't hear in my head. I wouldn't be thinking of that. But we all need to recognize that we have it. So if someone tell you that they don't see race, they're lying. The fact of the matter.
Dr. Nelson, appreciate that. And
Yes.
because we want to keep this flowing, the Sarasota Tribune did a report on on the sentencing. Greg and I had the opportunity to meet with former Chief Judge Lawton. We had this discussion. Judge, this is going to be one for you as it relates to you have a black male, a white male commit the same offense based on data and research that was done by the Sarasota Tribune. They saw that black males were sentenced to harsher sentences. One of the things that the Chief Judge mentioned to me at the time was now that that information is out there, he was looking at more trainings for judges and things of that nature. What is your response to looking at, now that we know and we look at the data, what can we do to impact that?
Well, I know Judge Lawton, he's retired now, and I can tell you that you have to have the mindset like that. When you talk about leadership, he was our lead judge, and with a mindset that we're going to hear these levels of impact to the African American community in a study like that, and we're not just going to bury it or deny it. That's where change is going to start. As an attorney, I wanted to join the judiciary because I wanted to be able to make a difference. So another thing you have to do is diversify the system that you're working within. We still don't have enough of minority and people of color judges. And that in and of itself, to me, is going to be a big step towards the conversation of implicit bias in sentencing. We also have implicit bias in jury selection. There are cases that have come out, United States Supreme Court cases that have come out that address implicit bias in jury selection, making sure that people are not stricken to serve on juries on the basis of their race or ethnicity. So, the issue is what are you going to do about it? Because the cat is out of the bag. We know it's there.
So Judge, and I'm going to throw back to Greg. When you talk about judges and the fact that we don't see enough judges of color on the bench, that is controlled, if you would, through the Judicial Qualifying Nominating Commission, correct?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that go into play because you have to apply. I think we need to encourage more people of color to actually apply to become judges. You got to have confidence that you can do the job. It's a tough job. It's not easy, and there are some restrictions. You kind of have to be a little more reserved once you become a judge, and some people don't want to totally change their lifestyle. But so a lot of things come into play. But what you said, Rod, is absolutely correct. It is control the nomination process by a commission. If folks feel like they can't get through the committee, they may be a little afraid to apply. So we have organizations of African American law organizations that have guest speakers come in. I think I spoke a few years back, Paul C. Perkins Bar Association, and I spoke on the topic of the pathway to the bench. And I encouraged more attorneys to apply. And I absolutely saw more attorneys applying, and that gets to your point. A lot of them are not getting out of the committee. So how do they get out of the committee? Well, everything's political, and so I think you
Comes back to Dr. Nelson's point.
you work and you work within the community. You get to know people within the community, and you try to get support from people who will back your name, because your name is really all you have when you're trying to rise from the level of an attorney to a judge. It's your reputation. If people don't know you, then they are not going to be able to put their name behind yours.
Greg, I go to alley-oop.
Yeah, well, this question is going to be for our two chiefs, so Chief Alon and Chief Q. The question involves police officers when they are caught doing something wrong or illegal, and they are suspended with pay, and then just before any proceeding takes place, they may resign from that position and then go apply somewhere else and get a job somewhere else. How do you stop the process of a bad officer going from one agency to the next?
So the state has a responsibility to evaluate the certification for the individual, especially when they have been found to have violated a law, right? So they meet, they go over the individual's situation, and then based on that, they determine if they deserve to be given some type of probation, some type of status that basically says you may retain your certification, but you have to do the following. Or they may just say your certification is done, it's over. So it goes beyond the agency at that point. I think it's a question for the state really to figure out how it is that they're. And actually, if anyone has an opportunity to someday go to those hearings,
Yes.
you should.
Sure.
You should. You hear all the details and all the specifics, and sometimes they'll surprise you. Something that you think, well, this is going to get maybe some type of, hey, don't do it again. That person's certification is gone. And then another case where you think maybe this one deserves, for the certification to be removed, that one is retained.
Right.
So it fluctuates.
So Chief Q, just kind of follow up with that. In that process, if there's someone who goes up on committee or whatever that process is, and they're just given a slap on the wrist, so to speak, just so long as their certification is not removed,
Right.
they can still be hired somewhere else.
Right.
As an agency, though, if you know that someone has had an issue in the past, despite the fact that they still maintain their certification, how do you handle that type of situation?
Well, any agency has an opportunity, as Chief Alon said, to go to those hearings and to hear. And at the end of the day, if there's a person that I don't believe needs to have their certification, I can have members of my team go there and, talk about specific cases and everything else. And at the end of the day, those individuals that have a probation on their certification, they still have to qualify within our agency. Our
Right.
agency has guidelines, so it's you can participate on both sides.
Now there's one thing though that for both of us, that and for obviously the entities that regulate our certification, if you lie, you're done.
Right.
There's no forgiveness whatsoever. If you are found guilty of lying, you are absolutely done. Your certification is revoked.
That's like having a conversation at the federal level. You tell a lie, you're done.
Yeah.
Hey, we need to get through some more of these questions, and here's one, and this is for the entire panel. What can communities do to develop a better relationship with law enforcement of trust?
I believe, please double check what you see on social media. Don't always take what you see in social media as 100% truth. And I'll say it real quick. We had an incident where there was a vehicle stop and the individual being put in the back of the car happened to be Hispanic. Someone was recording the incident, and during the recording of the incident was saying the Orlando Police Department is now working with ICE and they're rounding up illegal immigrants. This person had a huge pool of followers. You know how damaging that was for anyone who was here maybe potentially illegally, who could be a victim of domestic violence, could be a victim of a violent offense, and may say, I'm not going to report it because the Orlando Police Department may be working with federal agencies. So don't believe everything you see in social media, please.
Can I add to that? Social media, they jump on law enforcement when there's something that occurs, rightfully so, okay? But what I'd like to share with everyone is that though there's one incident, we must remember that it doesn't identify the whole department that is bad. We have close to 1,700 staff members. If one or two individuals do something that lose the trust of the community, please understand, those are individuals. We have more people that come to work every single day and that are doing the right things, and we're losing focus on that.
Well, Chief, on that note, Pastor, this might be a barber chair that you're sitting in, but it's also the hot seat too. and so, based on what you just heard, and we just always need to, be straightforward with this. Talk about community's responsibility as well to be held accountable for what takes place in the community.
Oh yeah, I'm one of those. I'm just straight up honest. All that no snitching thing, I think that's the stupidest thing I ever heard in my life. How could I be more angry with you for telling on you, for telling on him for killing him than I was that he killed him? Right. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But as it relates to communities and officers, I think if we see them more in a non-policing kind of environment, we have some officers that actually go to our church as well. But if you see them maybe not arresting people, or maybe not pulling them over, hey, we're just over here hanging out, and then they realize that officers are people too. You know what I mean? Right. Just like pastors, people have a certain stigma about certain pastors and all this kind of stuff. But once they get an opportunity to experience you on a personal level, absolutely, maybe not in your profession, and I think that the more that they're seen in public, go to the picnic, and you might not have to wear your full uniform, wear your police hat. Right. So that at least know you're an officer.
So on that note,
I'm sorry, can I chime in just real quick, because the 9th Judicial Circuit, we have an awesome website, and we are offering courses. Once a year we have this big major opportunity for people to come out and learn about the courts. I think our new Chief Judge, Judge Myers, is still going to continue that. And I think you sometimes need to learn from who really knows. Learn from the experts about law, from lawyers and from judges and from law enforcement people, which kind of goes back to don't get your teaching from any other source like social media or something like that. Try to frequent these types of events and hear from people who work within that. And I know sometimes you can be a little bit skeptical and say, well, you're going to tell us the good things that we want to know. Well, then you have people like Dr. Nelson over here. He's going to tell it like it is. He's from education. So he's going to tell it like it is, but at least try to make sure that you know the truth before running with something that you heard from somebody.
Right, and it's on both sides. I mean, it's like a marriage, it's on both sides. If someone, a black boy, a brown boy, girl, only time they see law enforcement when they're coming in arresting folk. If that's the only time I see you, you're negative. You just arrested my uncle, my brother, my cousin. Now, rightfully so. It may have been that they did something wrong, but if that's the only time I see you. Now, flip that. If a black, brown boy shot in the middle of the day in the community, 30 people out there, police come, no one saw anything. That's not the popo, that's us. Yeah. So both folk being accountable. We need to hold them accountable. So when something go down like a 6-year-old being arrested, damn right, I text him, hey, I know you're good people, you're excellent leader, but that's a negative reflection. Yeah. Same thing in the community. Something happened in the community. Hey, I know y'all, I'm with y'all, but damn it, that's us. That's not him. So we have to be honest with each other that we all have to be held accountable in this process. And if not, it is.
And I cannot stress enough to get the information from the individuals who know, because Brother Love and I were doing an event, and someone stood up in the audience and said that if you reported a crime through Crime Line, that they would release your information and that your information would be public and that they would know who reported it. And this caused a huge uproar. It took us probably, a month to clear everything up? Yeah. To where we had to go back to the person, provide us with the information, things like that. People in the community saying, well, we're never calling them again because and it wasn't true. So it's very important that you get the information from the individuals who do this on a day-to-day basis. The judge is telling you right now, we have training. We let people know about these things. The police officers, they'll let you know about these things. So make sure that you know that. And then also on another note, we got to plug Seminole County. Unity Day, Seminole County, every year, they have an event where they bring law enforcement out, first responders, and they have a fantastic time together.
Dennis Lima.
Dennis Lima. And I know the other thing, but they've been doing this for 9 years.
Woodwood Park.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. And I mean, you
Yep.
see police officers out there playing basketball with the kids. Just interacting, having having positive interactions with the community, which is important, and along the lines of what Dr. Nelson is telling us here today.
But hey, rapid fire. And this is Dr. Y'all put names on these cards now. Dr. Nelson, Chief, and Rev. Why crime containment policies in minority areas rather than crime prevention? Pastor, what about money matters?
Oh no, I think, we talked about this before. Money matters for real. That's the issue. I think socio-economic issues are the biggest issues. Why did you rob a store? I wanted some money, and I don't have. If I had enough money, I probably wouldn't have robbed the store. and I went to jail because I robbed the store. And so at the end of the day, if there are no opportunities to make substantial amounts. When I say substantial, I don't mean millions of dollars. I mean just enough to feed my family and take care of my responsibilities. Then, of course, you're gonna see crime. I mean, money, because money is the biggest issue. Scripture even says money is the answer to all things. Yes, it is. So these big problems we have, if we threw enough money at them, we fix them.
I'll be honest with you. The last thing an officer wants to do when they come to work is write a report. The last thing they want to do is spend time going to jail to take someone. They rather go somewhere and have coffee. They rather go somewhere and have lunch, have dinner. But we're forced to gravitate to certain areas because of the demand of our citizens who expect us to respond to calls for service. The demand of the situation or whatever's going on in the area that is attracting individuals to commit certain crimes. But here's the thing that we always preach to our officers. Don't ever label a neighborhood as a problem. Mm-hmm. Always think of the fact that there may be 1, 2, 3 houses within the neighborhood or individuals within the neighborhood that represent a very small percentage of the total community that is the problem. That's what we need to target, but it's a double-edged sword. We're expected to eliminate the crime, but in order to eliminate the crime, you sometimes have to have a strong presence in the area, and that's what we're constantly fighting with.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because the police come because they're called. Mm-hmm. So the black community, if you look at call logs, they call the police more. The black community is also more distrustful, fearful of law enforcement. So on the one hand, we call. On the other hand, the folk we call are the folk that we're distrustful of. But I think it's true. They need to build more law enforcement. And when I say they, I'm talking about as a profession. They need to build up our trust. And that's flip side as well. The community needs to. It would be very difficult for me to go help someone that when I get there, they don't want me there. That would be very difficult for me. So I think it's both ways. And the snitching, it's not just the community. That's the problem with law enforcement too. Mm-hmm. So just like we talk about it, and that's what I tell law enforcement. I say it's amazing that you hate, the fact that black folk won't tell and they snitch and you hate that. But law enforcement does this. Some of the bad cases, it's friends and everybody else knew about it. They didn't snitch. Mm-hmm. So snitching is bad both ways. It can't be bad when it's on this side. It's both ways.
Right.
Ray, what you got over there, man? I got plenty.
All right, so here's an interesting question, and I don't know how it will be responded to, but in the case of wrongful death, and reading this question, I'm assuming they're saying when a police officer shoots and kills someone wrongfully, kind of like what we saw in Texas. Instead of taxpayers paying the money in those cases, the question is, why doesn't the money come from police pensions for more accountability?
All right, so we have to look at every situation, obviously, separately, right? And what do we do I'll just use my agency as an example. What we do whenever there's an officer-involved shooting, we turn to FDLE, The Florida Department of Law Enforcement does an investigation. After they conclude their investigation, that then goes to the state attorney's office. Then we do an internal investigation of the process. Did you know that we publish every single detail as far as the outcome of those investigations in a portal where every citizen can see it for themselves? They can actually see the details as to whether it was justified or not. Thankfully, the majority of our shootings have always been justified because we're reacting to a situation, right? Now, there is always going to be a situation that may be questionable, but the fact of the matter is that the majority of our shootings have been justified. We cannot group all communities into one, as one, right? Whenever something happens, say in Baltimore, or something happens in another part of the country, and the actions of the officer were questionable, don't assume that the same issues are happening here in Central Florida. Monitor what's going on in Central Florida. Bring to our attention whenever you see that we're sort of going sideways, so that we can address that quickly. But I just hope that you recognize that we are very, very highly trained professionals here in this region, and we pride ourselves of that. And I think the caliber of the members of the law enforcement profession and corrections in Central Florida is really unmatched compared to other parts of the country.
Chief,
I apologize. Respectfully.
Yes, sir.
The question was about the money, the pension.
So here's the thing. I think that's more, should the entity that employs those individuals, the business, say the city, should they be responsible for any monetary benefits that the person may be owed? And often not. Whenever there's an incident that involves some type of error in the part of the officer, usually the city will pay for that, or the entity that has hired the officer or employs the officer will pay for that. So the mechanism is already in place for that person to be compensated through that. If someone is found guilty, say, of a felony crime, and they go to jail, they lose their pension, period. They don't get a pension.
Right.
So I don't know if you knew that or not. It's not like they go to jail and they still collect money.
Right.
But to that point also, it's already laid out in the statute, and the judge knows about sovereign immunity. And if a individual who's an employee of a municipality commits or does something wrong, it's the municipality that is responsible for that, and you can't even name a individual in a lawsuit in cases like that.
And something else I would add, just kind of civics, is that it is the legislature that makes the law. Law enforcement enforces the law, and obviously the judiciary interprets the law. So we have to act within the parameters of the laws that are there, the laws that are on the books. And the chief could not arbitrarily decide to change the way that lawsuits are paid out on his own. That has to go through a process, a legislative process, and this kind of speaks to something else the community can do. If you find a law you don't like, or you hear of a law that you just really don't disagree with, you can do like Desmond, what's his last name? Desmond Meade. I was going to say that, but I just didn't want to mess it up. Desmond Meade, and you can get out there and pound the pavement and try to make changes in the law. Any citizen can do that.
so a legislative policy issue.
Yes, any citizen can be engaged in the legislative process. And I teach a little civics class in the justice teaching program to young kids, 5th grade, 6th grade, and I always encourage them that from even a young age, you can be involved in our legislative process. You can be involved in the process of making laws and changing laws. If you identify laws that you like, then you work to support them. If you identify laws that you disagree with, then you can work with those laws. There are things that you can do. With the judiciary, you can serve on juries. So many people don't.
Chief, real quick response. Most people are under the impression that when people are sentenced to the jail, that they're sentenced to the jail for a year. What's the average stay in New Orleans County Jail?
The average length of stay for a person in the general population is 27 days. That's why it's so important when we talk about re-entry and we're putting all these programs together, we've got a short period of time to go ahead and provide the services that they need. For those individuals that suffer from mental illness, that's 40 days that they stay in jail. So you see, the time is very short, and we put a lot of energy and effort into providing the programs that they need to get back onto the community. But what we've heard over and over again is that it is a community. It is a collaborative effort that needs to take place if we're going to make things right. The jail can't do it by themselves. The courts can't do it. Law enforcement can't do it. Community can't do it.
Right.
We have to do it. We have to get
Absolutely.
together. We have to build that synergy off of one another to make a change.
And Chief, I think it's important for everybody to understand too, you oversee, and what's the capacity of the jail there?
The jail, our population today is 2,000 2,552 inmates today.
But your reach is much larger than just the jail. You have probation, you have reintegration.
Oh, yes, I have programs. I've got community control. I've got security.
So it's more than bricks and mortar.
Oh, yes.
A lot of money.
So
Yeah,
it's not
that's what
only,
it is.
it's not only the individuals that are inside of the jail, but we also have community corrections, offenders that are outside on probation that we supervise as well. So it's big.
So I have a question here before I get to a question, because I think I can answer this one just real quick. The question is, will officers be more prone to use all other options prior to death if they know it would affect their pension, as opposed to a blank check from tax money? With cases involving the state or municipality, there's a thing known as sovereign immunity, which means that the amount of money that's paid is capped at $2,000, per incident. And so there's no blank check that's written. 200. What did I say?
200,000.
What did I say?
2,000.
Oh. My leg hurt. $200,000 that they'll be paid. Now, the only way they can go above that $200,000 is if they go to the legislature and they get a claims bill, which is a whole nother process, which is very difficult. So there's not a blank check that's written for these things, but it should be something, I believe, that if I'm understanding the chief right, they do know that if they're found guilty of a felony and they go through due process, that they lose all of the rights and benefits of being a law enforcement.
My question is more so not necessarily been found guilty. A lot of times officers are found justified in shooting, and there's still a civil case later where they're found to have been in the wrongful death. So it wouldn't be like necessarily illegal that they shot the person, but the family still lost somebody. I'm just saying in terms of if they know that's not affecting them personally, you can get back to when you're talking about keeping police silent. If the whole group knows, hey man,
All we can do is go off your question here. And so, yeah, when you
I'm saying by that, you said felony, I'm just saying it's not about civil.
Gotcha. So
So-
what we have to do is we have to stick with what we have here, but we appreciate the
So
question.
real quick, as a courtesy to you, so I guess the question is, were the individual's actions reckless, right? And so we got to keep that in mind. Were they malicious and reckless in intent? All of those things have to be taken into consideration. But maybe offline we'll talk some more about that. Okay.
And there's the LeMay case that spoke to that.
The what?
The LeMay case. There's actually a case dealing with an officer that was willful wanton and gross negligence in his acts and his duty. So there's an actual case out there. So
Chief, here's the question. After the officer was relieved of duty regarding the 6-year-old, and I'll get some clarification on this, was he allowed to return to the school the next day?
So the school, the charter school, was the employer. The employer, with the city of Orlando, you have traditional schools and then you have charter schools. The traditional schools have what we call a full-time SRO officer or a reserve officer who is trained as an SRO who works there full-time. For the charter schools, they're given the option of having a guardian, having a private security or a law enforcement officer temporarily fill the mandate from the state. In this case, the charter school is the employer. The employer says, I would like for you to send me an officer. The officer in this case was the regular officer. The following morning, the officer showed up at the school. The employer allowed the officer to work at the school. On our end, there's some miscommunication. The evening of Thursday, when this thing happened, he should have been told, don't bother showing up at school. That didn't happen. We're addressing that through our policy or through our review of the incident. But in the end, the employer, the charter school, allowed the officer to work. And in all honesty, they didn't have an issue with him at that point. We went to the school and said, that's it, you're not
Yes.
working anywhere.
See, that's a whole nother issue for me. The fact that a school, and it happens all over Florida, that a school system would think it's okay, someone to think it's okay to arrest a 6-year-old.
Well, and listen to this. I mean, when I was growing up, the principal had a paddle. And I mean, if I did something wrong, actually, I fear more what my parents were going to do to me than anything else. But law enforcement was not brought into the mix. Law enforcement was not, if two kids fought, they went to the principal's office and they dealt with it there. Now, unfortunately, if there's a victim, the victim wants to prosecute and everyone, then the law enforcement officer is forced to sort of deal with the situation. And in my opinion, it should be administrative in nature.
Well, who was the I'm still trying. Who was the victim with the 6-year-old?
I can't get into the specifics about that case, but there's a lot more that one day will
We
come out.
understand that. Here's, because we down to 15 minutes. Why criminalize tantrums in elementary schools? And I'm gonna go ahead and chime in on this piece.
Yeah.
What we have is, you know, if we were criminalizing bad behavior, I think everybody in this room probably would be over at Jackson. So what we have to do is make sure that we hold a entity that's not in this audience this evening, the school system.
Absolutely.
We need to make sure that we hold the school system accountable. All the folk that you see that are courageous enough to sit in these barber chairs, they're giving it to you. Whether it's something that's good, bad, or indifferent, they're giving it to you. But the response to that question in terms of criminalizing bad behavior, I think we need to go ahead and make sure that we hold the school system accountable to deal with those children.
But now here's a question though, because this is a charter school. If this was a public school, would the officer have been allowed to return if it were a public school? Or because it was a private school or a charter school, they kind of...
I think, and for us, the lesson learned was for our charter schools, although again, we treated them differently. From now on, what we put in place is if any officer who signs up to work at one of the charter schools, in red letters, it says, if you have any concerns or issues related to the children, you must call a school resource officer supervisor, period. I mean, when you sign up for the job, you know clearly that it's, in an ideal world though, our 9th largest school system in the country, Orange County. In my opinion, I think that they should explore having their own police department who have their specially trained officers to work in that environment who will handle that. But that's a discussion,
Because there are
obviously.
other school districts in the state of Florida, Miami-Dade
Yes, sir.
being one of them that has its own department. Greg, what do you have on that?
The question is, crime is down, but the police budget keeps going up. Is this an indication that the stats are being padded because certain zip codes have crime contained?
No, I think what's happening is that the profession is becoming more and more challenging to draw people into the profession. And I'm going to confess something to you. The Orlando Police Department, at one point, we try to always reflect the population that we serve. At one point, our African-American population with the Orlando Police Department was about 16-17%. It's down to 10. Here's another thing. I thought it was our recruiting efforts. So we've been putting a lot of efforts to make sure that we recruit more of the representation of our community into the mix. Then I went to the academy. And I looked at all the individuals at the academy, and guess what? Very little representation from the African-American community, right? So I believe social media is taking a toll on how our profession is portrayed, to the extent that we have a lot of people who may question whether this is a path for them. And we have so many great success stories. We have the Demings, our mayor, a congresswoman. We have other individuals who have come through the Orlando Police Department and many other agencies who have made a great career out of law enforcement. But again, we have to draw the people in, and because of that, we have to pay more, and that's leading to that. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I'm a pastor, and 12 years ago, I went to the sheriff and asked him for his officers of faith to come to our churches so that there would be a rapport, a relationship, a community relationship. And the sheriff at that time said, that's not what he wanted. He doesn't want his officers in our neighborhood to have that relationship. And so that goes back to that crime containment. Now we are the statistics that are being used to pad the budget.
So what we have to do is, and that's why we have a certain format, is that's why we want people to write down the questions, because if we start getting questions coming from the audience, we lose the quorum here. But we appreciate that.
And I'm from a law enforcement recruitment perspective. Dr. Nelson, I need you to hit it. I know you're not a politician or a pastor, but be as succinct as you possibly can.
No, I think it's he's right. I mean, as long as law enforcement doesn't have a relationship in the community, you won't. I mean, as any other. But at Bethune-Cookman University, every year we have the law enforcement, the Florida APCs, so we have Florida A&M, Bethune-Cookman, Edgewater, Florida Moore. Law enforcement come to me like I have a starting five. So they,
What kind of participation are you getting from law enforcement?
everywhere. I mean, law enforcement come from all over the state, once again, to our students. But yeah, you have black males that say it's not what I feel about law enforcement, but how they feel about me. And they see the things that you see also. That's why it has to be about relationships. So if they're coming there just to say, hey, come play for us, it's a relationship.
Okay, Dr. Nelson, let me ask you this, because we got to keep it moving. With that, are you or BCU or the HBCUs, are you tapping into, because you got these large faith-based organizations throughout the state that has a population, a captive population?
Absolutely.
So are you tapping into that population as well?
Yeah, not only the faith-based, everybody, if you don't want no black folk coming in as police officers in your community, then do what you're doing. Don't refer. You see a police officer at the store, you say, I'm going to tell that police officer on you. Now, this is what we're telling our kids. If you do something, I'm going to tell that police. So why would they want to be a police? So we collectively, we have to say, if we don't want to see all of what we see on social media, then we need to send good people in.
Right.
So the community has to do that. Now, he definitely has to recruit and come to our events and do all that stuff. But aside from that, we have to send our best and brightest. Why do we see our best and our brightest in terms of our judges? See, Orange County, if you look at Orange County, it's very diverse. Top down.
Yeah.
But if you look at the zip codes where the crime, so you can be as diverse as you want to be. You're going to still have issues, but those issues are education, politics, and everything else. We just have to do social everything. We just have to be.
And let me put it also from a community accountability standpoint. Orange County government is distributing $20 million in those 9 zip codes. Unheard of. It never happened before. Let's make sure we're clear on that. They opened it up beyond the traditional organizations that you're familiar with that are in those communities. Now, mom and pop, faith-based, you name it, gets to participate in that $20 million again. Never did it before.
Right.
So now here's, I hear the piece about, the increase of law enforcement's budget. Is it padding of the numbers? Well, now it's on the community because there has to be a return on that $20 million, and that return has to come in not what you say feels good,
Right.
but that return has to come in the form of, are we reducing kids from going into the juvenile justice system, which subsequently graduates to correction? Are we stopping dependent kids from leaving their homes, which pastor? It also, we need to look at what is the faith community doing to develop foster care homes for kids that can't go back to their original home. So now, when we talk about real accountability and responsibility, everybody's going to be looking at the community in terms of their accountability.
But let me say this though, because Brother Love's over here telling you about all of these things and how $20 million are now being dedicated to the 9 zip codes where the crime is really truly seen. What he's not telling you, that I'm gonna tell you, is the reason why I cite that is because of him. He was the county commissioner at the time that when they brought that information to the county, he looked at it and said, well, wait a minute. I'm looking across all of these other zip codes. I don't see the crime in these areas, but you're diverting funds to those areas. But in these areas where I see the most crime is where the funds need to be redirected to. So that's a part of what Dr. Nelson's talking about also. You have to have someone who knows and understands the community so that the funds can be directed, because none of us can write a 20-buck. Yeah, John Morgan in here. None of us can write a $20 million check. And that's the funds, those are the funds that are needed in these communities to help to address the things that we're seeing here now. I apologize, Chief Rolando.
Before we were finished though, I would like to mention the following. When I was growing up, I used to go around those houses and knock on doors. Hey, may I mow your grass? And I had my parents' lawnmower with me and go around, $5 for the front, $5 for the back. It gave me enough to go to the McDonald's. It kept me busy, right? We also had sports in junior high school where we could play basketball, baseball, whatever the case. It kept the kids busy. We lost a lot of that. And I think boredom leads to trouble when it comes to our youth. And maybe as part of future discussions, we need to figure out where were we 20 years ago and how was that working? And when those funds went away, what can we do to bring those funds back to maybe provide?
Kids listen to other kids. The justice teaching programs that I go into schools sometimes and talk to fifth graders, children are greatly influenced by what other children think. And which, when you're 10 years old, that isn't a big deal, but when you're 13, 14, the other child might be in a gang, and you don't want to be influenced, your child being influenced by gang members. So we have to just do something so that the kids have a place to go and have people to hear that will direct them to positive paths, direct them to after-school jobs, direct them to programs that they can participate in, and educate them about not just the justice system, but future careers that they may be interested in. Children do listen to other children, but we don't want them listening to other children. We want them listening to us. So I hope that $20 million helps with that.
Well, community should be held responsible as well as government. Hey, I don't know if y'all heard that background music.
That means, listen, we hope that you all enjoyed today's conversation. We're going to be continuing this series. This was the law and justice aspect of it. We're going to be talking about community redevelopment, job creation, and things of that nature as we continue this series, Black in America.
Yes, we want to make sure that we thank our guests. Hey, and let me say this. Yes, we thank you very much. And this is the part that we say to everybody here. You don't have to go home.